Hi, welcome. I'm Matthew from Dark Ascent, and today I'll be going over climbers who had to face one of the most brutal disasters Everest has ever had. From a man who got so isolated rescuers didn't find him for almost a week, to a doctor who made a horrifying choice at 26,000 feet, which honestly led to the most devastating outcome I've covered on this channel. It was May 19, 2016, and the Everest season was already shaping up to be the most crowded in years. 2 years earlier, an avalanche in the Khumbu icefall killed 16 Sherpas and shut the mountain down. The year after that, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake triggered avalanches that leveled base camp and closed the season before it even began. 2 consecutive years with no summits from the south side, something that hadn't happened in decades. By 2016, hundreds of climbers had been waiting 2 or 3 years for their shot. Permits had stacked up. Operators were under financial pressure to deliver after 2 seasons of refunds, and the mountain was more packed than anyone could remember. What nobody expected was that the season itself would become the disaster, finding 5 completely different ways to kill across a single month. Shortly after 2 in the morning, Ryan Aldrich departed Camp 4 for his summit push. Ryan was pretty much the kind of guy who could look at incomplete information and just commit while everyone else was still going back and forth about it. A 44-year-old oil and gas executive from Dallas who had spent 6 weeks and $65,000 for his shot at the summit. That quality of just committing had made him wealthy. On Everest, it would kill him. His mountaineering resume was respectable for a commercial client. Kilimanjaro, Elbrus, and Denali, all guided, all successful. He trained seriously, had a personal trainer, worked with reduced oxygen training systems, even slept in a hypoxic tent for 6 months before departure. He was fit for 44 and strong on uphills, but he had this kind of stubborn competitive streak that climbing partners had pretty much learned to just work around instead of trying to challenge. On Denali the previous year, he had pushed 45 minutes past his guide's turnaround time. Weather held, he summited, and the experience reinforced a belief he carried to Everest, that turnaround times were suggestions, not rules. Trust me when I say that lesson is the worst thing Denali could have taught him. His Sherpa was Nima Wangdi, 29, from a village 2 days north of Namche Bazaar, with 6 Everest summits in 4 seasons. Nima read weather the old-fashioned way, just watching cloud formations over Pumori and how fast the wind was moving snow off Lotz's Ridge. And honestly, that kind of knowledge you pick up from years of actually living up there is pretty much just as good as any satellite forecast. They climbed through pre-dawn darkness, the cold sitting around -25 before wind chill, the kind that turned exposed skin white in minutes and made every metallic surface a contact hazard. By 6 in the morning, first wave summiteers were descending, and 3 separate groups passed Ryan with the same warning. Wind increasing on the summit ridge, conditions shifting faster than expected. Ryan continued climbing. At 27,500 feet, Nima stopped and told Ryan they needed to go down. Ryan looked up, saw clear sky, and told Nima the wind was localized. The expedition leader's radio call arrived at 28,000 feet. Updated forecast, window closing. All climbers descend immediately. Ryan heard the call, acknowledged it, and kept climbing. 300 vertical feet from the summit, 6 weeks and $65,000, all compressed into a distance he could cover in like 90 minutes. Multiple warnings. Some climbers later said it was 5 separate chances to turn around, though accounts differed on exactly when. Either way, he just kept going. Nima made the decision that separated their fates. He told Ryan he would not continue, that the conditions were beyond what he was willing to risk. Ryan told him to descend, and that he would manage alone. Nima began down climbing. Ryan continued upward above 28,200 feet. The wind built way faster than anyone had predicted, and within less than an hour, visibility just collapsed, and it turned into full storm conditions. The last climbers above him vanished into spindrift. Within minutes, he was knocked off his feet twice. The fixed rope disappeared under blowing snow. His goggles iced over. He attempted to descend but could not locate the route. At extreme altitude in whiteout, your brain kinda loses its sense of direction before it loses motor function. So Ryan was basically just drifting off the southeast ridge with each step and had no idea. His last radio transmission reached base camp as static fragments that could not be reassembled into words. A recovery team found him 4 days later, seated in snow below the southeast ridge on the Kangshung side of the mountain. Ice had formed over his face and hands. His oxygen bottle was empty. His body showed no signs of a fall. He had simply sat down and never stood up again. He had been 300 feet from the summit, and 300 feet from the route that would have taken him home. 300 feet from the summit. 300 feet from survival. That one sat with me for a long time. Nima Wangdi reached Camp 4 safely that afternoon. He returned to Everest the following season. But Ryan wasn't the only one the mountain took that season. Less than a week later, during the next summit window, it went after someone who had done everything right. It was May 25th, 2016, around 9:40 in the morning, when Luca Messerli, a 31-year-old outdoor photographer from Zurich, reached the summit. Luca was not a mountaineer by identity. He was a photographer who climbed because the images he wanted existed in places cameras rarely went. A Swiss equipment brand had hired him to shoot summit day content, the kind of assignment that could fund 3 years of independent work. He trained for 18 months, acclimatized properly, and arrived at Camp 4 lighter and faster than most clients. What gets me about Luca is there's no moment where you can say he messed up. With Ryan, you're almost yelling at your screen. With Luca, you're just watching it happen to someone who did everything right. The weight trade-off was the detail that would matter. About 6 pounds of camera gear tucked inside his suit basically replaced all the emergency bivouac stuff his expedition leader had recommended. So no bivy sack, no shelter, nothing extra beyond what he was already wearing. He planned to move fast, summit early, and never need what he left behind. His Sherpa was Chiwang Nuru, 36, 7 summits across 9 seasons. Compact, steady, the kind of guy whose hands could grip frozen rope for hours, which honestly sounds superhuman. He carried Luca's backup oxygen and watched his client with the attention of someone who read trouble in the way a person placed their feet. He was among the first 10 to reach the top that day. 8 minutes of efficient shooting, then immediate descent, hours ahead of the weather that was already building below. The bottleneck caught him at 10:20. Congestion at the Hillary step had slowed both ascending and descending traffic to a crawl. The narrow ridge allowed only one direction of traffic at a time. Luca and Chiwang ended up just standing there exposed at 28,700 feet for over an hour, burning through oxygen way faster than anyone had planned for. Chiwang gave Luca his backup bottle after about an hour, leaving Chiwang on his last supply. By 12:30, the bottleneck cleared enough to descend. But the margin was gone. Storm was rolling in. Visibility getting worse by the minute. Temperature just dropping fast. Luca moved slowly on the traverse below the Hillary step. Coordination clearly eroded by over an hour of standing still in the cold, burning through oxygen at extreme altitude. His camera bag shifted his center of gravity on steep terrain. At 28,100 feet, his crampon snagged on uneven ice and wrenched his knee sideways. The stumble was nothing, really, the kind of thing that pretty much any fresh climber would have corrected without even thinking. Luca's hypoxic body could not. His leg buckled and he went down hard. Descent speed collapsed. And this is where it starts to really get to me because there was literally nothing wrong with his plan, nothing wrong with his execution, just a traffic jam he had zero control over, and one tiny stumble that his body was too drained to fix. What followed was 3 hours of short roping, Chiwang bearing Luca's weight step by step through full storm conditions. Visibility down to almost nothing, wind gusts strong enough to knock both of them sideways. At 27,200 feet, Luca stopped responding. His eyes were still open, but they weren't tracking anything. Chiwang kept dragging until his own hands failed. Hours of gripping wet rope in -40 wind chill had frozen the tissue solid. He lowered Luca to a sheltered spot against a rock band, covered him with his own down jacket, radioed Camp 4, and descended alone. The jacket. He gave him his jacket. I had to walk away from my desk when I got to that part because Chiwang knew it wasn't going to matter, and he still took it off his own back. Chiwang Nuru reached Camp 4 at 8 that evening, barely able to hold anything in his frozen hands. He lost portions of 3 fingers across both hands in surgeries over the following weeks, and his career guiding at extreme altitude was done. Just like that. Ended on a descent where he was trying to save someone who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Luca Messerli was not recovered. He was 31. The mountain wasn't done. Weeks before Luca even reached base camp, it had already set a trap that nobody saw coming. It was May 11th, 2016, around 6:30 in the morning, when Oliver Braun made the call to turn around. Oliver was 40, a corporate lawyer from Munich who processed risk for a living, Elbrus, Aconcagua, and a previous 8,000-meter attempt where he turned back at Camp 3 when things started looking bad. and he actually saw that turnaround as a win, not a failure, which honestly says a lot about him. He had departed with the later groups, and by 6 at roughly 27,000 feet, the wind began gusting in patterns that felt wrong. His expedition leader radioed that the forecast held. Oliver did not believe it. On paper, Oliver is the success story here. Guy reads the weather better than 3 forecasting services, gets himself down hours ahead of the storm, and then the mountain punishes him for it anyway, which honestly feels personal. He reached Camp 4 at 9:30 and found his tent demolished, poles snapped clean, sleeping bags soaked through, oxygen bottles scattered across the south col by wind that had ripped the whole thing apart while he was climbing. Oliver, shaking with early hypothermia, found an intact tent from a different expedition, crawled inside, got into the sleeping bag and hooked up an oxygen bottle, which at that point was honestly just basic survival, not stealing. Before we jump back in, if you've been enjoying the content and haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time. It honestly helps us keep making more of these. Anyway, back to it. Patrick Nolan, 37, was a construction company owner from Dublin who had summited Cho Oyu 2 years prior. He departed with the first wave and summited at 10:45 that morning. The descent pretty much destroyed him, 14 hours above 26,000 feet with the storm arriving, as he fought his way down fixed ropes, shaking in wind, strong enough to literally lift his body sideways. Even before reaching Camp 4, the signs were there, Patrick twice clipping into the wrong rope line, once trying to attach his descender to a fixed anchor that wasn't even part of the route, and there were moments where Lakpa had to physically grab him and redirect him before Patrick even processed what was happening. At the time, it could have been exhaustion. At altitude, those things overlap, but looking back, it was clearly the start of something worse. His Sherpa, Lakpa Jangbu, 33, guided Patrick down with the steady competence of 4 previous summits. They reached Camp 4 at 3:30 in the afternoon in full storm. Patrick staggered to his tent and found Oliver Braun inside, in his sleeping bag, breathing his oxygen. What followed was not a fight. Neither man had the energy for aggression. Patrick stood in the tent entrance, wind blasting through the open vestibule, snow swirling in around his legs, and told Oliver to leave. Oliver, whose speech was still a bit slurred from the cold, explained his tent was wrecked, and that going back outside would basically be a death sentence. Patrick reached for the sleeping bag zipper. Oliver grabbed his wrist, not aggressively, but with the desperation of someone who understood what losing warmth meant at this altitude. There's no villain in that tent. I want to be clear about that. Just 2 guys who can barely think straight, trying to figure out who gets to survive. Lakpa Jangbu entered behind Patrick and assessed the situation. 2 hypothermic climbers, 1 tent, limited oxygen, storm with no end in sight. He separated their hands and made the call. Both stayed. Patrick got the sleeping bag since it was his. Oliver was wrapped in emergency blankets and spare layers, and Lakpa basically just wedged himself into the vestibule, partially exposed to wind, using his own body as a wall between the storm and the 2 men he was trying to keep alive. Through the night, what had started as confusion on the descent progressed into full cerebral edema. Patrick's speech fragmented completely. He kept fumbling with his oxygen mask, pulling it away from his face before Oliver or Lakpa could get it back on, which is apparently something the brain does when it's swelling, and it kinda tricks the body into thinking it's overheating, even though it's actually freezing. Lakpa administered dexamethasone and increased flow aggressively, despite rapidly depleting their remaining bottles. Oliver held Patrick upright when breathing became labored, propping him against the tent wall. Try sitting next to someone while they die and then not talking about it for the rest of your life. I don't think most of us could process that, let alone carry it quietly the way Oliver apparently did. Patrick Nolan died before dawn on May 12th. His breathing just kinda slowed over the course of a few minutes. His body stilled, and when Lakpa checked his pulse at first light, there was nothing there. Oliver survived, helped down to Camp 2 the following day, and evacuated by helicopter from lower on the mountain with moderate frostbite. He never spoke publicly about the night. Lakpa Jangbu provided the only account. Patrick was 37. He had summited Everest 11 hours before he died. 11 hours. He was standing on top of the world at 10:45 in the morning and dead before sunrise the next day. And I still don't think that timeline has fully sunk in for me, even after going through it multiple times. The upper mountain wasn't the only place the 2016 season was taking lives. Weeks before any of those summit pushes, down in the icefall, it had already started. Honestly, This next one is the hardest for me to cover. It was April 22nd, 2016, 3:30 in the morning, when Tomoko Ishida, 35, a high school geography teacher from Osaka, departed base camp for what should have been a routine acclimatization rotation through the icefall. She had saved for 4 years to afford Everest. She was not wealthy, not chasing records. She climbed because mountains had been her thing since she was a kid, back when she used to trace contour lines on maps in her dad's study and just picture herself walking along them. She had summited Manaslu the previous year and approached Everest with real thoroughness. A stomach illness had cost her 3 days at base camp, pushing her behind the main timeline, which is why she was still running acclimatization rotations while other teams had already moved higher. Her Sherpa was Furba Chering Tamang, 31, 3 seasons maintaining the icefall route. He knew its architecture the way a carpenter knows a frame. They moved through the lower icefall without incident, threading between ice towers and crossing ladder bridges, over crevasses that dropped into darkness. At approximately 11 in the morning, unseasonal winds swept through the lower mountain. Gusts funneled through gaps in the ice and struck with enough force to stagger a loaded climber. Furba signaled to increase pace. The ladder crossing was standard. 2 aluminum ladders, lashed together, spanning a crevasse roughly 12 feet wide, deep enough that the bottom disappeared into blue-black darkness. Tomoko had crossed identical setups during her first rotation without any issues. She was mid-crossing when the ice shifted. Furba heard it first, a low grinding vibration, distinct from wind, distinct from normal settling. A serac uphill had moved. The anchor ice shifted just enough to torque the ladder sideways, and Tomoko basically slammed against the rungs and ended up suspended partially beneath the crossing, clipped into the fixed line, but unable to get any stable footing back. The gap behind her had widened beyond stepping distance. She could not go forward or back. Furba anchored on the near side, talked her through stabilizing, and radioed base camp for the route team and any available Sherpas. The response told you everything about how the icefall works. The wind had destabilized the route, seracs were shifting, and the path that was safe at dawn was now actively unstable. No experienced route doctor or Sherpa would send rescuers into the icefall once the seracs started shifting in high wind. The route team told Furba to hold position. Estimated wait, 6 to 8 hours. 6 to 8 hours. When I first read that in the incident report, I actually went back and checked it again. 40 minutes on a normal day. 40 minutes. But the wind had made the entire icefall too dangerous to enter, and nobody could get to her. Tomoko could not hold indefinitely. The harness carried some of her weight, but the twisted position was cutting off circulation through her legs, and her forearms were doing all the work just trying to stay stabilized against the rope. The cold was constant on every surface. Furba tried to rig an improvised rescue, tying slings together and lowering a line across to her. The gap was manageable, but Tomoko's hands had lost fine motor control. Gloves soaked with meltwater had refrozen around her fingers. She could reach the line but not grip it with enough strength to hold her own weight. 3 attempts, over 90 minutes, each one a little weaker than the last. Core temperature dropped steadily. Speech slurred into fragments mixing Japanese and English. Her grip weakened in increments Furba could track by how her body sagged lower each quarter hour. Furba is 8 feet away with a working rescue line, and the only thing stopping it from working is that her fingers won't close. I keep turning that over in my head because 8 feet is nothing. That's across your living room, and it might as well have been a mile. Tomoko Ishida fell from the ladder at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, 3.5 hours after the initial incident. The crevasse just took her. No echo. Nothing. Just gone. He remained at the edge for another hour before conditions allowed retreat, standing motionless the entire time in case something changed. 4 hours standing motionless on ice cost him 2 toes to frostbite, and he never went back to Everest after that, which honestly just breaks my heart when you think about the fact that he did everything he possibly could. Tomoko was 35. She had never reached Camp 1. She never even made it above 20,000 feet. On any other day, that altitude is a warm-up, not a death sentence. That's the part of this I genuinely cannot make peace with. And then, near the end of the season, the mountain saved its worst for last. It was May 29th, 2016, 3 in the afternoon, when the first casualty arrived at Dr. Ingrid Lund's tent at Camp 4. A late-season storm had collapsed the final summit window hours ahead of forecast, stranding dozens of climbers above 26,000 feet with dwindling oxygen and rapidly deteriorating conditions. Ingrid was 41, an emergency physician from Bergen, Norway, who had joined the expedition at reduced cost in exchange for serving as team doctor, which is a pretty common arrangement on commercial expeditions. She was competent on rock and ice, but present primarily for the medicine, not the summit. Her assignment was to remain at Camp 4 during summit day, monitor radio traffic, and treat returning climbers. Her medical kit was kinda designed for her 8-person team, stuff like dexamethasone, nifedipine, painkillers, wound care, a pulse oximeter, and oxygen, enough for maybe 2 or 3 serious cases tops. She kept a single emergency bottle for herself, but that was it. Every other bottle was allocated to returning climbers. Remember that. 1 bottle for herself. Keep it in mind because it's going to matter. That first patient was a Korean climber from a neighboring expedition, snowblind and hypothermic. Not her client, not her responsibility. She treated him without hesitation. Once word spread that a doctor was actually working and had supplies, the tent became the de facto treatment center for the entire South Col. Over the next 13 hours, 11 people showed up at her tent or were carried to it. Frostbite, pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, hypothermia across the board. Climbers from 4 different expeditions, speaking languages she couldn't even understand, just showing up faster than she could deal with the ones already inside. She worked by headlamp and touch. Readings that back in Bergen would have meant immediate intubation had to be weighed against patients who were somehow even worse off. She gave her emergency bottle to her second patient and never got it back. After that, she repeatedly removed her own mask to conserve oxygen for deteriorating climbers, rationing whatever Sherpas could find. Her Sherpa, Dawa Sange, 49 summits, worked beside her through the entire night without complaint. He translated for non-English speaking patients. He held headlamps steady during procedures requiring both her hands. He restrained a delirious climber who tried to walk out of the tent in just a base layer, full altitude psychosis. Dawa had seen it before. He handled it calmly. The kit ran out by the 6th patient. Ingrid started sending Sherpas to raid empty tents across Camp 4, grabbing oxygen bottles, medical supplies, food, water, basically anything they could get their hands on from caches belonging to companies she had never even talked to. Think about that for a second. She's 6 patients in with 5 more coming and she's got nothing left. So she just starts taking from other expeditions. Because what else are you going to do? Let people die because the supplies belong to someone else. The procedure that tested her most was a needle decompression on a climber who had taken a hard fall against a fixed anchor during descent and arrived with what she recognized as suspected tension, pneumothorax. At 26,000 feet, by headlamp, with numb hands and a brain running on scraps of oxygen between mask rotations, she found the intercostal space, by feel, and got the needle in. The hiss of escaping air confirmed placement. Breathing eased within seconds. Most field medicine I've come across in these stories is desperate and it doesn't work. This one worked. At 26,000 feet, by headlamp, barely any oxygen in her own system. I still don't fully understand how she pulled that off. She did not eat for the entire 13 hours, did not sleep. The intermittent breaths of oxygen between patients kept her going, but every hour up there was just doing damage she couldn't feel. By the early hours of May 30th, Ingrid's body finally gave out. She collapsed around 4 in the morning, roughly 13 hours after the first patient arrived. She had not moved from the medical tent the entire time. Dawa found her at first light, conscious but couldn't stand, lips blue, skin that gray-white color that basically just means the blood isn't carrying enough oxygen anymore. Her breathing was wet, fluid in the lungs, severe hypoxic injury after prolonged exposure in the death zone. Evacuations began at dawn. She was helped down to Camp 2 over the following day, a descent that required constant Sherpa support, and evacuated by helicopter from lower on the mountain to Kathmandu on May 31st. Treatment began immediately. She responded at first. Saturation improved, fluids started clearing, and she was aware enough to ask about the climbers she had treated, her patients. That's what she asked about first. That tells you everything about who she was. Complications from prolonged hypoxia and systemic organ stress developed over the following days. The damage that 18+ hours in the death zone had done to her was just more than medicine could walk back. Dr. Ingrid Lund died on June 14th, 2016, in a Kathmandu hospital. She was 41. She had never attempted the summit. 13 hours, she kept choosing right, gave away every bottle, treated every patient, never stopped. Most of the deaths on this channel come down to one bad decision. Ingrid didn't make a single one. She just ran out of herself before she ran out of people to save. The 2016 season was supposed to prove that Everest was back. In some ways it did. More climbers reached the summit than in any year since 2013, and expedition companies called it a return to normalcy. But the cost was written in the names nobody celebrated. Chiwang Nuru lost portions of 3 fingers, short roping Luca Messerli through storm. Furba Chering, Tamang lost 2 toes, standing on icefall ice, trying to save Tomoko Ishida. He took work as a lodge operator in the Khumbu and did not return to the mountains. Dawa Sangye finished out the season, escorted patients to Kathmandu, went to Ingrid Lund's memorial in Bergen that September, and then quietly retired from high-altitude work. Among the Sherpa community, the season was remembered less for the climbers who died than for the guides who were broken saving them. Expeditions continued climbing. The permits remained valid. The mountain moved on. It always does.